calendar year 2012 to 2013 budget for Cuyahoga County. And the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Rogers. Here. Ms. Simon. Here. Mr. Greenspan. Here. Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Brady.
Present.
Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Strawn.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Conley.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. And Madam Clerk, do we have anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chairman, no one has signed in.
Okay. And my colleagues, in your packet, you should have the minutes for the November 14th meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Second.
It is moved by Councilman Brady and seconded by Council President Connolly. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes for November 14th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. We now go to the minutes for November 17th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for November 17th? Okay, it is moved by Councilman Rogers and seconded by Councilman Jones to approve the minutes for November 17th. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? November 17th are approved. We now move on to matters referred to the committee, which is Resolution 2011-0291. The clerk would please read the resolution.
Resolution number 2011-0291, a resolution adopting the 2012-2013 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd now like to take a moment to explain to my colleagues and to the public the process that we're going to use this afternoon. In the last meeting of the Committee of the Whole and the meeting before, we passed a number of changes to the budget resolution, simply in the form of a list of changes, but those had not yet been put into legislative form. The Director of Budget and Management prepared a substitute resolution prior to the last meeting. However, that substitute resolution contained some changes that had not yet been discussed by the Council, which were technical in nature, and it also did not include a couple of items that the Council had approved, and also we passed one amendment subsequent to the preparation of that substitute. So what the first part of our meeting today is going to be to get us a substitute resolution that reflects everything that we've done so far. And the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to hear the technical amendment that OBM prepared that includes all of the technical changes that are in the substitute resolution. After we deal with the technical amendment, I will ask for a motion to approve the substitute as the version before the committee, and we will then ask to amend that motion to include the three items that were not included. When we complete that process, then we will have before us a substitute that will reflect everything that's transpired so far. And then at that point, the question will be what further amendments we want to make in the budget resolution. And we will use the list of proposed amendments by topic and go through topic by topic and discuss those proposed amendments. So For purposes of discussion, I would ask if somebody would make a motion to approve the technical amendment from the Office of Budget and Management. Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Rogers and seconded by Council President Connolly. Okay. Now I would like to ask Director Rubino to come forward and to go through this item. And this item is the item of 2 pages. It's headed by the Office of Budget and Management is submitting the following technical corrections to the 2012-13 proposed budget, and it has 10 items on the first page and 10 items on the second page listing what budget it is and what the purpose is and so on. So hopefully everybody has that in front of you, and I'd like to ask the director to go through item by item and explain what each of these items is for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Rubino, Office of Budget Management. And what you have before you is a listing of the either technical changes or corrections that the staff have made to a variety of line items within the proposed budget. Just to take a step back, in previous years, we hadn't gotten to the submission of a budget to the elected body, at that point the commissioners, until the middle end of November. So a lot of the technical changes, corrections were wrapped up in the administrative hearing process. Now we have a process that, of course, is one more deliberative, and we're also submitting a proposed budget much earlier. So the staff are obligated to go back, go through the budget again, do an internal review, and also consult with agency fiscal staff if they notice things that may be missing or in the incorrect budget account or line item. We go ahead and make those changes, and we've submitted them in amendment format for this new process. So that's what I'll be going through. There are really just 3 basic sections. Anything that was related to general fund items, and that's the first page and a half. Items that impacted levy-funded agencies, and then there are a couple items from other funding sources. So chiefly what you have are either realignments, corrections, or things may have been omitted, replacing them in where they should be. The overarching goal is to, on top of reviewing the additions that we'll be discussing here this week and next week, the budget that gets submitted and approved, we want it to be accurate. Our objective is to avoid having to come back in first quarter with corrections to the operating budget in our bi-weekly agenda. Operating budget that's being adopted for the next 2 years correct. So that's the reason we're doing this work and proposing it to you.
Okay.
We'll start on page 1, the general fund items. The first 2 are, one is for fiscal office, the other is for information services. They are realignments within those existing departmental budgets. There's no net change. For fiscal office, it's a brand new budgetary structure, so we were doing some fine tuning. And with the ISC budget, same thing. That departmental budget has been around for some time, but we've guided them, providing them some guidance on how to realign their individual divisional budgets. So we made some additional realignments within that departmental budget. And again, no net impact. Item 3 is for the Inspector General Office to have the correct estimate for space maintenance charges based on what we think their percentage of shared costs would be for the space they occupy. So it's an additional $60,000 to their budget. Item 4, the internal audit controlled costs were incorrect. We had inadvertently consolidated several agencies within their line item. So we're backing out $246,000 from the original $286,000, and we're basing that estimate on an office of 4 people, what type of charge we think that would generate based on the space they occupy. Item 5.
Yeah, Mr. Rubino, when
Yes.
you go back on item 3, was this $60,000 for the Inspector General? It was just forgot to include it?
It was the incorrect amount. We had an amount, I think, of $20,000, which is much too low for the space they occupy.
Okay. So the person, when they drew up the budget for the Inspector General, she just didn't know how much to put in?
It was our error, not hers. We're the ones who worked the control lines for the agencies. We just had incorrect amounts in some of the newer accounts. Item 5 was internal audit. We provided an estimate for their contractual services. We're anticipating that that office would have some contracts for either technical or contractual services. They may also have some need for IT applications related to audit software, so we provided an estimate in their contract line. That was not in the proposed budget, so we placed appropriation there. Items 6 and 7 net out against each other. We're moving appropriation between the contracts and benefits line in the executive office to properly appropriate those two lines. Item 8, Human Resource Commission, and item 9 is also Human Resource Commission. That's a realignment. They are going to be leasing non-county space. So we're moving appropriation out of the controlled line to the contracts line. And number 10, self-insurance fund. A little history here. On average, we've normally appropriated about $800,000 in the self-insurance account, and that's to pay claims, legal claims, and settlements. And the budget that was submitted used an historical average, about $800,000, 347. We've been looking at this year's activity, and right now we have not paid out. We're under $100,000 this year, which is very interesting. So we decided to go back and reduce that line in a budget for both 2012 and 2013 based on the activity we're seeing right now. So the proposed budget will have $150,000 set aside for 2012 and $300,000 for 2013. Now the county does have other pending settlements or lawsuits that total in probably over $1 million. We do not appropriate that list because many of those cases are remote in nature. So what we stick with is some sort of historical average. Based on what we're seeing this year in activity, we felt it would not be wise to appropriate $700,000 or $800,000 when we're not even going to hit $100,000 this year, which is a good thing, and we'll continue to monitor the activity for the county self-insurance fund. These are legal claims, not health self-insurance. Page 2, item 11 was a realignment within the Justice Services budget. We did a little fine-tuning. Again, we're working on making sure the new budgetary structure conforms with the ordinance that was approved to consolidate and organize justice services. Item 12 was a realignment within the medical examiner's operating budget. There's no net change. And item 13, we had omitted some travel and training costs from the Westlaw contract and travel costs from the prosecutor's office. So we placed those dollars where they should be. And we have a net reduction in general fund of $660,000 in 12 and $17,000 in 2013, based on those corrections.
Okay, before you continue on to the next one, the council president had a further question about the internal audit.
I didn't have a question, I just wanted to give a statement. This provision for the internal auditor is provided for in section 11 of
Yes.
the charter. And I've actually been in the process of kind of working on a memo to distribute, and then we got tied up with this. We have never funded the internal auditor, nor have we selected a person. We're in the process. Mr. Steen and Mr. Stensenbrenner and I, and two actually other persons, and we actually have an open spot on the internal audit committee, which is posted on the website if anyone is interested in applying for that. We're in the process of filling that committee and then also hiring an internal auditor. And this is actually a further check on the fiscal office. So I just wanted to point that out to you, and we'll be working on that because this internal auditor is a council appointment. We are the exclusive persons to appoint the internal auditor and or remove the internal auditor. So that's a office has not been funded through this year, but we should hopefully have it running within the next, I don't know, 3 months or so. And then also it will apparently produce some income in the sense that when we do these internal audits, it'll be charged back to the various departments. So I just wanted to give that brief explanation.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilman Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to review, these first 2 pages involve some technical changes and some increases and some decreases to the budget exclusively involving the general fund.
That is correct, general fund.
And just so I completely understand, where do we end up in the end? Are we asking for a little? Are you asking for a little more or a little less?
Mr. Chairman, for the general fund items, there's a total on the.
I see the total.
After item 13, so we're reducing general fund. We're proposing that these corrections would reduce general fund budgeted expenditures by $660,000 in 2012 and $17,672 in 2013. And again, they're not requests to do anything different. They're corrections or technical changes only.
And so, Mr. Rubino, Mr. Chair to the Rubino, so you're asking for over $1 million in reductions to the request from the general fund over the biennium?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Brady, it'd be less than $1 million. It'd be just under $700,000 for the biennium.
700,000?
For the 2 years, it's over $1 million.
If I have the wrong total then on the bottom of 13 then? So
If you
yes.
add 12
Yes.
and 13, it's over
Yes.
$1 million.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at a $5 and thinking it's a dollar sign. You're correct. It's 517. My apologies. I have a line through the, yes, over $1 million in the biennium.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Councilman Greenspan and then Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on number 3. Understanding that the space maintenance comes in one bucket and you allocate the bucket out, based on,
Yes.
on a formula, where's the other $60,000 a year coming from? Obviously, I would expect it to be a realignment. If 60 is going to the IG and you had this bucket, then where's the 60 coming from?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Greenspan, most of it's coming from that reduction that we did in internal audit. We had over appropriated that line item for internal audit. We're reducing that by $246,000.
So you're not reallocating then the entire space maintenance expense by every department? You're just
No.
You're just lumping it. You're just
Making
lumping it
those
into
two
one.
corrections, yes. Now, we'll do one more review. I'm not anticipating any changes to either the central services facilities budget or the ISC budget. If their costs don't change, then we will probably leave the allocated lines, the control cost lines as they are. I think they'll be close enough to get us through next year.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, one more question. I'm going to jump ahead. I'll ask the question now, but you can give the answer when we get to that section. Under the administrative substantive amendments further on the agenda, I'd like to know what the net number is to the general fund. If we're saving 667 and 517 with the additions that the executive would be proposing, I'd like to know at that point what the net number is to the general fund. Not right now, but when we get to that section.
Okay, Councilman Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Rubino, on the self-insurance fund, I really didn't understand why. I guess traditionally we've been reserving 800,000,
Yes.
and now we're going down to 150 and 300. That's because of the size of the reserve, or is it anticipated claims? I'm just wondering why it's so dramatic, and who's making that call?
Councilman Germana, it's based on our recent activity with claims. We feel we'd be over appropriated at the historical average. It's going to require some further review as to why we're not paying out as many claims. It fell off a cliff. It's amazing. Went from 700, 800,000 a year, excluding last year where we had two very large payouts totaling $5 million. Usually comes in that $700,000, $800,000 range. Again, this year based on activity and as far as the outstanding lawsuits that we're aware of, doesn't merit appropriating at that historic trend this year or next year. Now, if there are large payments that have to be made, as in any other case, as was the case last year, it gets paid out of reserve. So we appropriate something. This is an operating budget line that take care of the smaller, frequent claims you get for damage to personal property and some smaller settlements. They may be related to personnel, things of that nature that we appropriate in this line. But based on what we're seeing right now, we think this will be adequate unless something changes with some of the other outstanding settlements, or not settlements, but legal claims.
Is there an outstanding reserve fund for self-insurance?
Councilman Germana, it would be part of the overall general fund reserve. Part of our financial policy states that the reserve is used for large legal settlements, unplanned legal settlements.
So is there a number for self-insurance? Or is it just
No,
lumped
it's
together?
commingled with the reserve, correct. Now, there is a document that the county prosecutor works with the director of accounting and the fiscal officer when they're preparing the annual audit. And the prosecutor staff, they will review all outstanding cases, and they'll provide a number that appears in the CAF. I don't know what that number is right now, but when the 09 and 10 audits get released, there'll be a footnote as to what potential outstanding legal claims are on the county. And it's our reserve more than adequately covers all of those, even the remote possibility cases, and it always has.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilman Rogers.
No, it was just on that same point from Mr. Germana. It seems like that this year is basically an anomaly as opposed to the trend. The trend has been, anywhere from $650,000 to $800,000 a year. Last year was, or 2 years ago was $5 million, I think you were saying.
Yes.
And now for us to go to 150, it just seems like the logic behind, or the rationale, is based on just this year that's been so drastically different than the rest. And I'm wondering if that's, the right way we should go. I mean, perhaps it should just be half, or we're not seeing a trend. We just see something that's drastically different than what the trend has usually been. And just
I'd like to make a comment on that. I think the reduction is not only due to this year's experience, but also looking at what the inventory is of pending cases that's out there. And usually these cases take quite a while to be resolved, and something that we're not even seeing as of right now. It would be unlikely to hit us in 2012, and I presume the reason why the 2013 number is a little bit larger than 2012 is that there could be some stuff that come up in the next year that could hit us in 2013 that we don't know. So would that be
Yes.
reflecting the way your strategy is?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is the idea. Again, if we look at what's outstanding, a lot of the outstanding legal claims are in the remote category. So I wouldn't use them to calculate what's likely to be paid next year or 2013. We are escalating that in the second year just to accommodate perhaps a buildup of cases that have to get paid, so more or less reflecting the timing of those cases. But right now, based on what we know, what we've seen, we may be seeing a different trend as far as legal claims. Last year, on top of the two large ones, we had a lot of other cases that got us over the $600,000 or $700,000 mark. So I think we've, in a sense, cleared a lot of those cases out and have paid them. And now maybe we'll see a more normal trend of 150 to 300 per year, and an occasional large settlement based on what's out there.
Okay. Ms. Simon?
Thank you. Just a quick question on the prosecutor's Westlaw contracts. Was it originally omitted and now you're adding it back in? Or?
Correct. Mr. Chairman and Councilman Simon, yeah, it was omitted. It was our error, so we're just placing it back in their budget per their request.
Okay. What's that for? Just Westlaw? Oh, just
Yes,
regular Westlaw?
Yes.
Okay. What?
Ms. Conwell?
Through the chair to Mr. Rubino, could you explain 8 and 9 for me a little bit, the Human Resource Commission? So the 12,000 is, and then I see you have parentheses in the next one.
Yep.
That's for office space?
Correct. We the initial budget assumed county space, so we had space maintenance charges. Now we have a rental. They're going to rent. I think they're renting space, so that would come up in their contracts line rather than the controlled line. So if you occupy county-owned space, you don't pay rent, but you're paying space maintenance charges. If you're in a rented space, you most likely will not have space maintenance charges because the county is not securing or maintaining your building. So they switched categories from county-owned to rented space, I believe.
So it's actually the same cost?
Yes, it's a net wash, just moving it between the two budget lines.
But I thought we were trying to move away from leased space.
They're an independent agency. They've decided to go with rented space for right now.
Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rubino, on item 12, the medical examiner, it says revising the split of the budget based on projected activity. Are those projected activities the regional crime lab and efforts to not outsource, but generate revenues?
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Jones, what we're doing is one final attempt to allocate their budget amongst their two main operating accounts. They have a medical examiner operating account, and for this year, we took a piece of that, over $2 million, and allocated it to the regional crime lab budget, which receives a general fund subsidy and also receives some, will receive some fee revenue. This change was one more realignment based on information from the medical examiner staff on where they think the budget needs to be allocated between those two main accounts. And again, it's a net zero impact. We're moving between two. One's a general fund account, one is general fund subsidized. So we're moving dollars between two general fund impact accounts to try to capture what we think will be an accurate reflection of how they're going to fund their two main programs.
In the Board of Controls, there was a item that was tabled, but is there any federal dollars going toward the crime lab?
Councilman Jones, not that I'm aware of. They have received some federal grants in the past. Those were managed with outside grant accounts. They were not, generally the money was not brought into their operating account. They would, the DNA backlog is an example. I believe that's federal dollars. They manage those as separate grant accounts and perform the work and fund the work for the backlog through that grant. And the grant revenue doesn't flow into the operating accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Director, if you could proceed through and explain the HHS levy provisions and the other funding sources provisions, and then we'll see what more questions there are.
Okay. On the third page, the next 8 items are human service levy impact items. Again, we have the first 2 items are to add appropriation for Department of Children and Family Services and Employment and Family Services to reflect the impact of the ratified contract with ASCME 1746. And we have both the 2012 and 2013 impact for those 2 agencies. And most of the staff within that unit fall within Children and Family Services and Employment and Family Services. Item 3, it was another correction, and item 4, another correction related to space maintenance expenses. They were not included in the original operating budgets that were proposed. We're placing those estimates back in, and those estimates were based on their projected expenditure for 2011. Item 5 is a correction to the contracts line for the Office of Health and Human Services. We double counted one of the contracts, and based on that assessment, we reduced that line item to correct that mistake. Item 6 was a recalculation of the levy subsidy for CISA. In years past, CISA did not receive a levy subsidy. They had been able to cover their operation through their reimbursement dollars and through other revenue sources. In the past year and going into this year and next year, they will be receiving a subsidy from the Health and Human Service Levy Fund. The subsidy dollars that were proposed were miscalculated. The analysts went back and corrected that calculation for CISA. We want to make sure that their projected expenditures and contractual obligations are covered in this subsidy dollars that transfer into the CISA fund. What we've seen historically, at least this last year and this year, is that they tend to spend at a slower rate. So even though we're appropriating what we think the full amount should be for the levy subsidy to CISA, our anticipation is they will end up needing less than what's appropriated, but nonetheless we're obligated to provide what we think is the total obligation for levy dollars to operate CISA next year. And that's the $686 for 2012 and additional $497 for 2013. Item 7 is the ASCME increase impact for Department of Senior and Adult Services for both 12 and 13. And item 8 is a shift of $610,000 out of the Treatment Alternatives to Street Crime budget that's being shifted to a grant account. So both the revenue and the expense will not be reflected in the operating budget. So it's a net wash as far as the realignment is concerned, with that activity shifted out. And the total impact for levy funding for 2012 is $1,240,000, and for 2013 it's $1,949,000. The last 2 items are other funding sources. the benefits office, which administers the self-insurance fund for healthcare. We omitted a contract for $264,000. We put that item back in their operating budget. And the last item was for probate court. There's a salary adjustment for magistrates that's paid from their dispute resolution fund, not the general fund, and we added those dollars back in. That has already commenced in 2011, so it should be part of their 2012 base, and it was left out.
Thank you for that explanation. Are there any questions on this group of items? Councilman Greenspan.
So if I understand on the HHS levy, you're looking for 3.2 million more coming out of the reserve, correct? Between the 2 years, roughly.
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Greenspan, yes.
So that's an additional 26% on top of what's already being utilized out of the reserve, which is 12.5 million, correct? So now the total coming out of the reserve is 15.7 million, correct?
Councilman Greenspan, based on the proposed budget, the numbers have changed somewhat since the additions to areas of health and human services, but if we were looking at the original proposed budget numbers, yes. So these are on top of the proposed, plus any of the additional items that are included in the current form of the substitute resolution. But yes.
I'm just going through what we have approved nothing so far.
Correct.
So the 12.5 million in the executive's recommended budget is the base. So that's where I'm going.
Yes.
And if you look at of the 3.2 million, not to be critical, but I'm going to be a little critical here, half of it comes from OBM corrections or miscalculations. As we sit here and struggle with these reserves and trying to be prudent in utilizing those reserves, $3 million is a pretty big chunk coming out of a reserve budget. And my concern is, what else is going to be coming down the road that we're going to hear miscalculations or corrections? Because I have a feeling we're going to start dwindling some of these reserves. We're going to have to if there's anything approved on either side, the HHS or the general fund reserve. And we don't have we do have money in there. There's obviously an open debate as to how much is acceptable to appropriate at this time. But 3.2 is a pretty big chunk to kind of say, oops, we missed.
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Greenspan, it's also less than 0.5% of the total levy expenditures. Again, they're not necessarily requests. These are corrections. And our goal is to have a budget that is accurate. The budget that gets approved is accurate in all aspects. So we're obligated to, again, review internally and take any suggestions or corrections from agency fiscal staff and make sure they're included. Otherwise, we'll be coming back in the first quarter through the semi or biweekly amendment process to the county budget.
No, Mr. Chair, I understand your position. I understand those statements, and I'm a finance guy, so I understand how sometimes things happen, and I understand the biweekly process that we'll go through to amend. I would not have expected 3.2 million in corrections in a stagnant process, in a stagnant budget that is yet to be approved. That's my concern.
I see. Okay, Councilman Brady.
Yes, Mr. Rubino, you had alluded to the fact that we're going through a new, more deliberative process than before. The administration, to the extent there was an administration, that the budget proposal came earlier than in the past, and that the revisions to the budget are really taking place, if I understand what you said, at about the same time that they had in the previous process, say last year.
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Brady, yes. Just in this case, we're a little more deliberative because we have this long stretch of time between original submission to the hearing process, so it's being taken care of through this committee.
Well, to the issue Mr. Greenspan Councilman Greenspan had raised about a 0.5% difference in what you had proposed before and what you are now adjusting upwards for. You've been here, I know, for a while, and in the past, does this look like it looked before in terms of after you tighten the screws on on the original proposal, or is the process just so different that you can't compare it?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Brady, the process, at least the outcome of how we develop the numbers, is similar. Again, it's the deliberative process is different. In years past, quite honestly, we would have made the changes, and when we submitted the final resolution to the commissioners, the changes would have been in there. We may have informed them of some of the larger changes, but we wouldn't have had this formal process of allowing you to review, ask questions, and understand the nature of the changes. And I'm not aware of any other local government, state government that doesn't have some ability to provide technical revisions to a budget that is in a working format as this one is. Again, we're obligated to make sure the numbers accurately reflect where we think they should be allocated. The general fund numbers came down. The levy numbers slightly higher. Nonetheless, we want the numbers to be correct. So again, we're not asking to do additional things. These are things that are technical nature or were omitted by our staff, and we're correcting them and providing this to you for review.
So last follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. So in both the cases of the general budget and the Health and Human Service budget, you would consider these adjustments to be normal and modest?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Brady, yes, I would.
Thank you.
One comment that I would make is that we've been discussing right along the idea that so far the budget had no consideration of raises for employees, and that we thought at some point that there might be some, and there might have to be some adjustments made. Well, with this amendment, at least to a partial extent, in the sense that the AFSCME contract is incorporated, which is our largest labor contract, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
So that incorporates something that we kind of knew was coming and puts a number on it, so that's helpful. Are there any other questions or comments? Councilman Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to, I recognize that, and as my colleague pointed out, Mr. Brady, that errors take place, and that's normal within any budgeting process to have a corrective action that takes place. In some of its elements of forecasting, some of it's pure calculation, but the risks on the reserves can be affected by both expense errors and revenue errors. And you've made a correction proposal here on the expense side. In yesterday's newspaper, there was discussion in regards to the valuations, none of which discussed a 5%. They were all at the level of 10% loss in property valuations, and is running as high as 30%. Do you think that it would be prudent also, though it's not a technical change, to be re-examining that in light of what we have seen as to its impact on the Health and Human Services levy as far as on the revenue side?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Schron, we will do that review, but I hadn't anticipated making any more changes to the estimates as part of the budget hearing and development process. I anticipate in first quarter and again in second quarter, we would do that review once we have more information on exactly where property values may be going on a county-wide basis. Understanding that some tracts of the county, there could be double-digit loss. Some areas there may be some gain. For right now, I think we're safe, or not necessarily safe, but confident the 5% is at least a good estimate of where we may be in 2013. It allows us to wait for some additional information next year. And if we have to make additional changes to how we fund programs, to what the anticipated revenue is, we will. And that's no different in the past. Again, the county has always been cited for having a very proactive management process when it comes to developing the county budget and other areas of financial planning. So the tendency is to come up with an estimate, provide an explanation of why we've chosen that, the 5%. And as we have more information next year, we'll continue to hone that information in the estimates for the budget and provide that to you. And if we have to make additional decisions on cuts, on the level of the other Health and Human Services levy, That's a policy decision that will be made in the coming months and year.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, you indicated that in the past that you have not have not seen this kind of change, at least I think as it occurred in your comments. In the past, though, property values were not eroding to the speed to which they're eroding historically. I don't know how long have you been on the job?
Mr. Chairman, I've been here 11 years.
Okay, and in that 11 years, have you seen it erode or historically increase?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Shaw, one clarification. I think I may have been speaking about the combined collection rate, not the assessed valuation rate.
Right.
Now, they're both important, obviously. On the assessed valuation, we did see a 5% loss as part of the 3-year update, and we've incorporated that lower collection into the numbers starting back in 2010. Right now, what we've seen in the 2 intervening years is that the current assessed valuations have held steady for now. Obviously, the 6-year update is going to bring something different, and hopefully not more than what we anticipated. The other issue of the total collection rate, the current collection rate plus the current delinquency collection rate, that's the one area that was of concern this year because we had expected around a 96% combined collection rate, and what we saw was something just under 95%. Now, the good news is we do have some ability to exert some pressure and have some control to take proactive steps, whether it's going after delinquent property tax collections and other areas of the collection piece that the county treasurer administers. With the assessed valuation, obviously there's not as much we can control short term. Maybe long term, there's some things that are going on that can help. So those are the 2 items that are of concern. But for now, based on what we know with assessed valuation, the 5% for us is the prudent approach to take, at least when it comes to providing you a budget estimate for 2012 and 2013.
Thank you.
Councilman Greenspan.
Thank you. I have a follow-up. I was going to touch on this later, but since Mr. Schron touched on the revenue aspect of the budget, he talked about the reappraisal process. Obviously, we now are aware that the NBA season is going to proceed. How much was in the budget, as far as the NBA season, the county being, having to come out of the general fund reserve in order to fund the deficiency of the revenue?
Mr. Chairman and Councilman Greenspan, we had anticipated a $500,000 loss. Now that we know of a date when the NBA season will commence, we'll fine-tune what that loss will be. We'll still lose some dollars because we're missing 2 months of activity. Those are 2 months that we won't see admission tax for basketball games. Those taxes help offset the county's general fund contribution to the arena debt. So each year the county has an annual debt service payment of $9.5 million. In years past, between $6 and $6.5 million of that payment has been offset by revenue, including the admission tax. So I think that $500,000 loss will be $500,000 or $600,000. We're going to go back and look at the numbers this week and get an idea of historically what do we normally collect in November and December, and come up with what we think the loss is to the general fund. Thankfully, it's only 2 months, not an entire season, so that helps.
Okay. And the other question I have on the revenue side has to do with the failure of the super committee to come to a resolution of the $1.2 trillion cuts that are coming in 2013. There have been reports that it'll be very heavily weighted towards health and human services as far as the cuts are concerned, but not only in that area. Do you have any idea have you heard anything about how that clearly will have an impact on our revenue side? Do you have any idea how we could even project what 2013 might look like? I know we'll have a better feel around May, April, May, but is there anything now that you might have heard or through?
Councilman Greenspan, I haven't heard anything specific other than what's been published. You have the uncertainty of the date. It's 2013. Not sure what will happen between now and 2013, to be honest with you. There are some things that were not included as part of the sequestration process, but that process may go to the wayside anyway. They may end up coming back and providing some additional recommendations that do get adopted by Congress and not the super committee. For right now, we're not including any assumptions on revenue loss from federal sources. Where I think we're most vulnerable is probably to some of our grant-funded programs that receive federal dollars directly. So instead of the dollars that flow from the federal government to the state to things like health and human services and justice, I think some of the areas whether it's community development, the housing grants, some of the justice grants. I think those are the areas the county may be most vulnerable. Number one, those are important programs that the county implements, but in some ways, those grant dollars offset general fund expenditures. So that's where the impact could be, that the county, if it chooses that some areas that are high priority that were funded through federal dollars may have to be picked up by the general fund or levy funds. I think that's where our vulnerability is with the talk of deficit reduction at the federal level.
Okay.
The other area, speaking of, is somewhat related, Councilman Greenspan, is the current state of short-term interest rates, which are tied to the perception or the health of the economy. They've been very low, obviously, for the past 2 years now. We're looking at another year and a half of very low interest rates. It's good if you're borrowing money. It's not so good if you're trying to earn interest on the county portfolio, something else that's somewhat tied to the discussion of the federal government and the national economy.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Okay, we do have a motion and a second, and so the question is whether to approve the OBM technical amendment. I would ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Calling the roll on approving the amendment, technical amendments from OBM. Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. Simon?
Yes.
Mr. Greenspan? Yes. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes.
Gallagher? Yes. Mr. Strawn?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell? Yes. Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the OBM technical amendment is included.
Thank you.
I would now ask if there would be a motion to accept the substitute resolution as the version of the budget resolution that's before the committee. Okay, it's been moved by Councilman Brady and seconded by Councilman Rogers. I would now like to make a motion to amend that motion to add the conforming amendment. And if you would turn in your packet, it's a single page item that says conforming amendment for substitute 2012-13 budget resolution. And this item has three parts to be considered together, and these are three items that were previously agreed to but are not reflected in the substitute resolution. And the first item is the amendment that Councilman Greenspan proposed and was approved regarding the appropriation for mental health for the Metro Health Hospital. The second item regards the automation reserve and the enterprise IT reserve. And in the substitute resolution, they're reflected as a single item for $4 million. However, the way the council passed it was to set up two separate reserves. The first was to use the existing automation reserve that's been carried over in the budget for the last 3 or 4 years, and allocate that reserve to be used for the large capital projects, and then to set aside a separate $2 million reserve for the enterprise projects, which is the more operational items such as disaster recovery. We also had passed a provision that in order for money to be spent from either reserve, that the county council must pass a budget transfer from the reserve. And as it was originally passed, it said that the budget transfer would go from the reserve to the Information Services Department. But in consultation with the OBM director, he recommended that instead of it going to the Information Services, that it would go to a separate line item for IT improvements. The purpose of that being to separate out the operational from the capital side of the Information Services operation. So that is the second item. And the third item is the increase in the subsidy to the Adams Board by $750,000 for 2012 only. That item was passed in the last meeting of this committee of the whole after the substitute version was prepared, so it's not reflected. And I would point out that I'm certain that the Adams Board subsidy is going to be revisited as we have an amendment to that effect, and the automation reserve might be revisited as well. But the purpose of this conforming amendment is simply to adjust the substitute resolution so that it reflects everything that we've previously voted on, and we can then start with a resolution that reflects where we're currently at, and then we start from there as to any further amendment. So I've moved the conforming amendment. It was seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilman Greenspan.
I'm sorry, I just have one question. So the process is we move the amendment forward, it goes on to the massive resolution, and then we'll vote each item up or down at a later date, at a later time?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Nobody submitted any amendment about wanting to change your amendment on Metro Health, so I don't expect that there would be any further discussion on that item.
Okay.
But I know there will be on the Adams Board, and there may be further discussion on the automation reserve. In fact, there was an amendment submitted on that, so there will be as well. So the last two will be separately voted upon later this afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the conforming amendment being added to the substitute resolution?
Excuse me, Mr. Miller, did we have a second on that?
It was...
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The main motion is now to accept the substitute resolution as amended with the conforming amendment as the version of the budget resolution that's before the council. The clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Rogers? Yes. Ms. Simon? Yes. Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell? Yes. Mr. Jones?
Yes.
And Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the substitute resolution as amended is now the version of the budget resolution that's before the council. And I would now call your attention to the document that says amendment list by topic. It's a 2-page document, and this this document reflects all of. We're going to recess for a couple minutes.